Millionaire meets poor twins needing surgery. Their drawing shows him holding them as babies. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of St. Mary's Children's Hospital in downtown Seattle. Outside, the autumn, rain tapped steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the quiet bustle of medical staff moving through the corridors. Nicholas Hale adjusted his charcoal grey suit jacket as he walked alongside Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the hospital's chief administrator. At 35, Nicholas had built Tech Vision Industries from a college dorm room idea into a multi-billion-dollar empire. But today, he felt oddly uncomfortable in his own skin. These charity visits were part of his company's PR strategy, but lately, they felt increasingly hollow. Mr. Hale, I cannot express how grateful we are for your foundation's donation, Dr. Reynolds said, her voice echoing slightly in the pristine hallway. The new cardiac wing will save countless children's lives. Nicholas nodded politely, his piercing blue eyes scanning the motivational posters lining the walls. Pictures of smiling children and inspirational quotes about hope and healing felt like a stark contrast to the underlying tension he could sense in this place, where life and death decisions were made daily. It's the least we can do, Nicholas replied, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd given this response countless times. Children deserve every chance at a full life. As they approached the pediatric cardiac unit, the atmosphere shifted. The walls here were painted in softer pastels, gentle blues and warm yellows, clearly designed to comfort young patients and anxious families. Nicholas could hear the distant sound of children's voices mixed with the occasional beep of medical equipment. There's someone I'd particularly like you to meet, Dr. Reynolds said, pausing outside a room marked Room 247. Twin siblings, Emma and Ethan Morrison. They're 8 years old and have been with us for 3 weeks now, waiting for surgery. Through the small window in the door, Nicholas could see 2 small figures sitting on a hospital bed. The boy was drawing intently while the girl watched, both of them wearing matching light blue hospital gowns that seemed too large for their thin frames. "What's their condition?" Nicholas asked, surprised by his own genuine curiosity. Congenital heart defects. Both children were born with complex cardiac abnormalities that have worsened over time. They need immediate surgery. But Dr. Reynolds hesitated, lowering her voice. Their guardian, their Aunt Sarah, works 3 jobs just to keep them housed and fed. The insurance coverage is minimal, and the specialized surgery they require is expensive. Nicholas frowned. Their aunt? What happened to their parents? Their mother died during childbirth, complications from the delivery. The father, Dr. Reynolds shook her head sadly. He left shortly after they were born. Couldn't handle the responsibility, especially with 2 sick infants. Sarah Morrison has been raising them ever since, but she's struggling financially. Something twisted in Nicholas's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. He'd grown up in wealth and privilege, never wanting for anything. The idea of children suffering due to financial constraints was both foreign and deeply disturbing to him. "May I meet them?" The words came out before Nicholas had fully decided to speak them. Dr. Reynolds smiled, the first genuine expression Nicholas had seen from her all day. "I think they'd like that very much." She knocked gently on the door before pushing it open. "Emma, Ethan, I have someone special I'd like you to meet." The twins looked up simultaneously, and Nicholas felt his breath catch in his throat. Both children had the same striking blue eyes that looked remarkably similar to his own. Emma had long, light brown hair that fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, while Ethan's hair was shorter, but the same shade. Despite their pale complexion and the obvious fatigue in their young faces, both children had an alertness, an intelligence that immediately reminded Nicholas of himself at that age. This is Mr. Nicholas Hale, Dr. Reynolds continued. He's the generous man whose foundation is helping our hospital help children like you. Emma slid off the bed and approached Nicholas with a shy smile. Hi, Mr. Nicholas. Are you really a billionaire? That's what Aunt Sarah said. Nicholas couldn't help but chuckle at her directness. Well, I suppose that's technically true, but I prefer to think of myself as someone who tries to help people. Ethan, still clutching his drawing pad, remained on the bed, but studied Nicholas with intense curiosity. Do you have kids, Mr. Nicholas? The question hit Nicholas unexpectedly hard. No, I don't. I've been very focused on my work. That's sad, Emma said matter-of-factly. Kids are the best part of everything. At least that's what Aunt Sarah always tells us. Emma's right, Ethan added, finally setting down his pencil. Even when we're sick, we still have fun together. We draw pictures and tell stories and play games. Don't you get lonely? Nicholas found himself genuinely considering the question, something he rarely did. His life was filled with board meetings, business deals, and public appearances, but when was the last time he'd felt truly connected to another person? Sometimes, Nicholas admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. You can sit with us if you want, Emma offered, patting the edge of the hospital bed. Ethan was just finishing a really cool drawing. Nicholas looked to Dr. Reynolds, who nodded, encouragingly. He carefully sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how sterile and cold the hospital environment was for these children who'd been here for weeks. What are you drawing, Ethan? Nicholas asked. The boy's face lit up. It's a picture from a dream I had. Well, maybe not a dream, more like a memory. But that doesn't make sense, because I was too little to remember. Emma leaned closer to her brother. Show him, Ethan. It's really good. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned his drawing pad toward Nicholas. I know it's silly, but I keep having this same dream where Emma and I are babies, and there's this man holding us. He looks really sad, but also really gentle. And he has the same eyes as us. Nicholas felt the world tilt slightly as he stared at the drawing. The image was surprisingly detailed for an 8-year-old's work. It showed a man in a dark suit holding 2 infants, one in each arm. The man's face was clearly defined, and the resemblance to Nicholas was unmistakable. Not just the eyes, but the shape of the jaw, the way the hair fell across the forehead, even the expression of deep sadness mixed with profound love. This is very good, Ethan, Nicholas managed, his voice slightly hoarse. You're very talented. Do you think he looks like you? Emma asked innocently. Ethan and I were just saying that. The man in the picture has the same eyes and the same nose shape. Nicholas couldn't tear his gaze away from the drawing. His mind was racing, trying to process what he was seeing. The date at the bottom of the page indicated Ethan had drawn this just yesterday, but the detail and emotion captured in the image suggested something much deeper than childhood imagination. When is your birthday? Nicholas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. March 15th. Both twins answered simultaneously, then giggled at their synchronization. Nicholas felt his heart stop. March 15th, 8 years and 7 months ago. He began counting backward, his mind suddenly filled with memories he'd tried to suppress for nearly 9 years. Mr. Hale, are you all right? Dr. Reynolds asked, noticing his sudden pallor. Nicholas couldn't respond immediately. March 15th, 8 years ago. That meant the twins were conceived around June, 9 years ago. Nicholas closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in that small apartment in Portland with her, Rebecca, the woman he'd fallen in love with during what was supposed to be just a brief business trip to Oregon. Rebecca, with her long brown hair and brilliant smile. Rebecca, who'd made him forget about his company, his responsibilities, his carefully planned life for 3 amazing weeks. Rebecca, who'd disappeared without a trace one morning, leaving only a note saying she was sorry, but she couldn't be part of his world. He'd hired private investigators, searched for months, but she'd vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Eventually, he'd forced himself to move on, to bury those feelings and focus on building his empire. But now, "I need to ask you something," Nicholas said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "What was your mother's name?" Emma and Ethan exchanged glances. "Rebecca," Emma said softly. "Rebecca Morrison. Aunt Sarah says she was the most beautiful and kindest person in the world." The drawing slipped from Nicholas's suddenly numb fingers. Rebecca Morrison. In all his searching, he'd never found any record of a Rebecca Morrison in Portland. She must have been using a different name when they met, but these children with his eyes, born exactly 9 months after their last night. "Together, Mr. Hale." Dr. Reynolds stepped closer, concern evident in her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Nicholas picked up the drawing again, studying every detail. The man in the picture wasn't just holding the babies. He was looking at them with the expression of a father meeting his children for the first time. An expression of love so profound it transcended the simple pencil strokes of a child's artwork. "Denise and Zintitum, it is did dare to tell me about your Aunt Sarah," Nicholas said, struggling to keep his voice normal. "Has she ever mentioned, did your mother ever talk about the baby's father?" Ethan shook his head. "Aunt Sarah says Mama never told her who our daddy was. She said Mama was very sad about it, but that she loved us more than anything in the whole world. She died because of us," Emma added quietly, her bright demeanor suddenly subdued. "That's what some of the kids at school say, that if she hadn't had twins, she might not have died." "That's not true," Nicholas said firmly, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Your mother's death was not your fault. Medical complications during childbirth are nobody's fault." Both children looked at him with wide eyes, perhaps surprised by his passionate response. "How do you know?" Ethan asked softly. Nicholas realized he'd revealed more emotion than intended, but something about these children, about the possibility that they might be his children, had broken down walls he'd spent years building. "Because," Nicholas said carefully, "no mother who chooses to have children, especially in difficult circumstances, would ever blame those children for complications that arise. Your mother loved you enough to bring you into this world. That love doesn't come with conditions." Dr. Reynolds was watching this exchange with growing interest, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "Mr. Hale," she said gently, "perhaps we should let the children rest. They have some tests scheduled this afternoon." Nicholas nodded, but he couldn't seem to move. The drawing in his hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. As he finally stood, Emma reached out and gently touched his arm. "Will you come visit us again?" she asked. "It gets lonely here sometimes, and Aunt Sarah can only come after work." "Yes," Nicholas said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll come back." As they walked back down the corridor, Dr. Reynolds was quiet for several minutes before finally speaking. "That was unexpected," she said carefully. "You seemed quite affected by the children." Nicholas was still processing everything that had happened in that hospital room. The resemblance, the dates, the drawing that seemed to show impossible knowledge, and most of all, the overwhelming feeling of connection he'd felt the moment he'd looked into those blue eyes. "Dr. Reynolds, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Is there any possibility, any chance at all, that those children's paternity might be uncertain?" Dr. Reynolds stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Mr. Hale, are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" "The resemblance is remarkable," Nicholas said quietly. "And the timeline, I knew a woman named Rebecca about 9 years ago. We had a relationship. She disappeared, and he found her again." Dr. Reynolds studied his face carefully. "The children have been in our system since they were 4, when they first started showing symptoms. There's never been any mention of the father's identity in their medical records. Sarah Morrison has legal guardianship, but she's always maintained that she doesn't know who the father is. Would it be possible? Could we arrange DNA testing? That would require consent from their legal guardian, Dr. Reynolds said slowly. And Mr. Hale, I have to ask, if these children are yours, where? Have you been for 8 years? The question hit Nicholas like a physical blow. If Emma and Ethan were his children, then he'd missed their entire lives, their first words, first steps, first days of school. He'd missed their mother's pregnancy, her death, their years of struggling with heart conditions while living in poverty. I didn't know, Nicholas said, his voice barely audible. If they're mine, I didn't know they existed. They continued walking in silence until they reached the hospital's main entrance. The rain had intensified, and through the glass doors, Nicholas could see his driver waiting with the black sedan. Dr. Reynolds, I need to ask you one more favor, Nicholas said. Could you arrange for me to meet with Sarah Morrison? I think it's time I got some answers. I can certainly arrange that, Dr. Reynolds replied. She usually comes by around 6 after her shift at the diner downtown. Would you like me to call her? Nicholas checked his watch. It was already 4:30, and he had a board meeting scheduled for 7. But suddenly, corporate responsibilities seemed insignificant compared to the possibility that 2 sick children in a hospital room might be his own. Yes, Nicholas said. Please call her. Tell her I'd like to discuss the children's situation. And Dr. Reynolds, please don't mention my questions about paternity, not yet. As Nicholas walked toward his car, the rain soaking through his expensive suit, his mind was reeling with possibilities and implications. In the span of 1 hour, his entire understanding of his life might have changed forever. He slid into the backseat of the sedan and pulled out his phone, scrolling to his assistant's number. Cancel my evening appointments, he said when she answered. Something urgent has come up. Sir, the board meeting. Cancel everything, Janet. I'll be staying at the hospital this evening. As the car pulled away from St. Mary's, Nicholas stared. Back at the building, where 2 children who might be his own were waiting for surgery they couldn't afford. Children who'd been drawing pictures of him without knowing who he was. Children who'd been living in poverty while he'd been accumulating billions. The drawing was still clutched in his hand, and as he studied it again, one detail caught his attention that he'd missed before. In the corner of the paper, in Ethan's careful 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Daddy holding us when we were born." Nicholas closed his eyes and leaned back against the leather seat. In a few hours, he would meet Sarah Morrison, and maybe, finally, he would get the answers that could change everything. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at 6:15 in the evening, with only a few exhausted-looking medical residents grabbing quick dinners between shifts. Nicholas sat at a corner table, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and checking his watch every few minutes. Dr. Reynolds had assured him that Sarah Morrison would meet him here, but as each minute passed, his anxiety grew. He'd spent the last hour and a half in his car, making phone calls to his lawyer and his private investigator. The same investigator who'd searched for Rebecca 9 years ago. If his suspicions were correct, he wanted to be prepared for every possible scenario. Mr. Hale. Nicholas looked up to see a woman approaching his table. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair streaked with premature, grey and tired eyes that held a wariness born from years of struggle. She wore a waitress uniform, a simple blue dress with a white apron, and carried herself with the exhausted dignity of someone who worked multiple jobs just to survive. Ms. Morrison. Nicholas stood and extended his hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Sarah shook his hand briefly, her grip firm despite her obvious fatigue. Dr. Reynolds said you wanted to discuss Emma and Ethan's situation. I have to be honest, Mr. Hale. If this is about some kind of charity publicity stunt, I'm not interested. Those kids have been through enough. Her directness surprised Nicholas, but he also found himself respecting her protective instincts. Please, sit down, and I assure you this isn't about publicity. Sarah slid into the chair across from him, her posture defensive. Then what is it about? Because I'll tell you right now, we don't need pity. We need medical care for those kids, and if your foundation can help with that, great. But I won't have Emma and Ethan treated like poster children for wealthy people's guilt. Nicholas studied her face, noting the fierce protectiveness in her expression. This woman had clearly sacrificed everything for those children, and despite her exhaustion, there was a strength in her that commanded respect. Ms. Morrison, I need to ask you some very personal questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Before I do that, I want to show you something. Nicholas carefully pulled out Ethan's drawing and placed it on the table between them. Sarah glanced down at it, and Nicholas watched her face carefully for any reaction. What he saw was immediate and profound shock. The color drained from Sarah's face and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Where did you get this?" "Ethan drew it yesterday. He told me it was from a dream he's been having, a memory of someone holding him and Emma as babies." Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached for the drawing, studying it with wide eyes. "This is impossible. There's no way he could know. He was just a baby." "Know what, Sarah?" Nicholas leaned forward, his heart pounding. What couldn't he know? Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time, Nicholas saw recognition in her eyes. "You're him, aren't you? You're the man from the hospital." "What hospital? What are you talking about?" Sarah closed her eyes as if steeling herself for a difficult confession. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "The night Rebecca died," she said slowly, "there was a man at the hospital. He was there during the delivery in the hallway, pacing like an expectant father. The nurses thought he was the baby's father at first. But then Rebecca, when she realized she was dying, she made them promise not to let him know about the twins." Nicholas felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. "I was there at the hospital when they were born." "You were at Portland General for 3 hours," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in the waiting room when they brought you in. You'd been in a car accident, not serious, just some cuts and bruises. But they wanted to keep you for observation." The memories came flooding back. The phone call that had interrupted his last night with Rebecca, his company's acquisition deal falling through, requiring his immediate return to Seattle. The hurried drive through the rain, his mind torn between business crisis and the woman he was leaving behind. The deer that had jumped into his headlights on the winding Oregon highway, causing him to swerve and crash into a guardrail. "The nurses brought you to the same floor where Rebecca was giving birth," Sarah continued. "You kept asking about getting released so you could catch a flight back to Seattle. You had no idea she was even pregnant, did you?" "No," Nicholas said, his voice hoarse. "She never told me. When I woke up that morning, she was gone. Just a note saying she was sorry, but she couldn't be part of my world." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She found out she was pregnant 2 days after you left Portland. She was terrified, Mr. Hale. Rebecca had grown up in foster care, bounced from home to home. She was convinced that if she told you about the babies, one of two things would happen. Either you'd feel trapped and obligated, or you'd think she was trying to trap you for your money. So she decided to handle it alone. She was going to tell you," Sarah said quickly. "After the babies were born, after she figured out how to be a mother, she was going to contact you. But the pregnancy was complicated from the beginning. Heart problems in both babies, and Rebecca developed preeclampsia. She was on bed rest for the last 3 months." Nicholas was trying to process everything Sarah was telling him. "You said the nurses thought I was the father. Why?" "Because you wouldn't leave," Sarah said simply. Even though you were cleared medically, even though you kept saying you needed to get to Seattle, something kept you there. You spent hours walking the halls, and every time Rebecca cried out in pain, you'd stop and listen. The nurses said they'd never seen anything like it. Sarah pulled a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes. When the complications started getting serious, when it became clear that Rebecca might not survive, one of the nurses asked if you were the father. Rebecca heard her and she panicked. She made everyone promise that if something happened to her, you would never know about the twins. Why? Nicholas asked, his voice breaking. Why wouldn't she want me to know I had children? Because she was dying and she was scared, Sarah said. She thought if you knew about Emma and Ethan, you'd take them away from me. She knew how wealthy you were, how powerful your family is. She was afraid that 2 sick babies would become a burden you'd resent, or worse, that you'd take them away from the only family they'd ever known. Nicholas put his head in his hands, overwhelmed by the tragedy of it all. Rebecca had died believing that protecting her children meant keeping them from their father. She'd chosen to leave them in poverty rather than risk them being unwanted. There's more, Sarah said quietly. After Rebecca died, after you left the hospital, something strange happened. The nurses said you came back the next morning. You asked to see the babies. Nicholas looked up sharply. I did what? You don't remember? Nicholas thought back to those awful days after the accident. He'd been on pain medication for his injuries, and the emotional trauma of losing Rebecca had left him in a haze for weeks. There were whole stretches of time from that period that remained foggy. I think I remember being drawn back to the hospital, Nicholas said slowly. But I thought it was because of the accident, because I felt like I'd left something unfinished. The head nurse told me that you asked to see the babies that had been born the night before. You said you'd been there during the delivery and wanted to make sure they were all right. She brought you to the nursery window. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos until she found what she was looking for. She turned the screen toward Nicholas, showing him a grainy security camera image. The hospital keeps these records for legal purposes, she explained. This is from the nursery security camera, the morning after Emma and Ethan were born. In the image, Nicholas could see himself standing at a nursery window, holding 2 infants, one in each arm. A nurse was beside him, and on his face was an expression of profound tenderness and heartbreak that perfectly matched Ethan's drawing. The nurse said you held them for almost an hour, Sarah continued. You wouldn't put them down. You kept saying they looked familiar, that something about them felt important, and then suddenly you handed them back and left. The nurse said, "You looked like you were going to cry." Nicholas stared at the photo, and suddenly the memories came flooding back. The overwhelming sense of connection he'd felt holding those tiny babies. The way they'd both stopped crying the moment he'd picked them up. The inexplicable feeling that he was meant to be there, meant to protect them. He remembered driving back to Seattle in a daze, unable to shake the image of those 2 perfect babies from his mind. For weeks afterward, he'd had dreams about them. Dreams where he was their father, where Rebecca was alive and they were all a family. Why didn't anyone tell me? Nicholas asked. Why didn't the hospital staff make the connection? Because Rebecca registered under a false name, Sarah explained. She was using Morrison as her last name by then. She'd legally changed it when she moved to Portland. And you never mentioned her name to anyone at the hospital. As far as the staff knew, you were just a car accident victim who felt drawn to help some newborns. Nicholas looked at the drawing again, understanding now why it had felt so familiar. Ethan hadn't been drawing from imagination or dreams. He'd been drawing from some deep, cellular memory of being held by his father in those first precious hours of life. Sarah, I need you to understand something, Nicholas said, his voice filled with conviction. I didn't abandon Rebecca. I didn't even know she was pregnant. If I had known about Emma and Ethan, I would have moved heaven and earth to be there for them. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "I believe you," she said finally. "Rebecca used to talk about you, especially in those last few weeks. She said you were the first person who ever made her feel truly loved. But she was also convinced that love couldn't survive the reality of your different worlds." "She was wrong," Nicholas said firmly. "And now I need to make things right." "Those children are mine, aren't they?" Sarah nodded. "I've known since the day they were born. They have your eyes, your expressions, even some of your mannerisms. Emma gets this little crease between her eyebrows when she's thinking hard. Exactly like you're doing right now." Nicholas unconsciously relaxed his forehead, suddenly aware of the expressions Sarah was describing. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Are you going to try to take them away from me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of fear and uncertainty. Nicholas could see the terror in Sarah's eyes, the same terror Rebecca must have felt as she was dying. "Sarah, look at me," Nicholas said gently. "You are the only mother those children have ever known. You've sacrificed everything for them, worked multiple jobs, given them love and stability in circumstances that would have broken most people. Why would I want to take them away from that?" Relief flooded Sarah's face, but uncertainty remained. "Then what do you want?" "I want to be their father," Nicholas said simply. "I want to get them the medical care they need. I want to make sure you never have to work 3 jobs again just to keep food on the table, and I want to be part of their lives in whatever way is best for them." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing everything that had been said. Finally, she looked up at Nicholas with a mixture of hope and wariness. "They're going to need that surgery within the next 2 weeks," she said. "The doctors are worried about waiting much longer." "Then we'll make sure they get the surgery," Nicholas replied. "The best cardiac surgeons, the best hospital, whatever they need. And after that," Nicholas considered the question carefully, "after that, we figure out how to be a family, all of us together. Emma and Ethan need stability, and they need you. But they also deserve to know their father." Sarah smiled through her tears. "They're going to be so excited. They've always wondered about their dad, made up stories about who he might be. Emma used to say she thought he must be someone important because they were so special." "They are special," Nicholas said. "And they're going to have every opportunity I can give them. But more than that, they're going to be loved by both of us." As they prepared to leave the cafeteria, Sarah turned to Nicholas one more time. "There's something else you should know," she said. "Rebecca left letters for the twins to be given to them when they turned 18. In Emma's letter, she wrote about you. She wanted her daughter to know that she was conceived in love, even if that love couldn't last." Nicholas felt tears welling up in his eyes. "What did she say?" "She said that their father was the most honorable man she'd ever known, and that if he'd known about them, he would have moved mountains to protect them. She said she hoped someday they might meet you, and that when they did, they would understand why she loved you so much." As they walked back toward the elevator that would take them to Emma and Ethan's room, Nicholas felt a profound sense of completion. 9 years of wondering what had happened to Rebecca, 9 years of dreams about babies he'd held for one perfect hour, and now finally, the truth. "Are you ready to tell them?" Sarah asked, as they stood outside room 247. Nicholas took a deep breath, looking through the window at the 2 children who were his own. Emma was reading to Ethan from a picture book, both of them curled up together on the hospital bed, looking small and fragile but utterly precious. "I'm ready," Nicholas said. "I've been ready for 9 years. I just didn't know it." Sarah pushed open the door, and both children looked up with bright smiles. "Aunt Sarah," Emma exclaimed, "Mr. Nicholas came back, just like he promised." "I know, sweetheart," Sarah said, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "Mr. Nicholas and I have been talking, and we have something very important to tell you both." Ethan set down his coloring book and looked between the 2 adults with curious eyes. "Is it about our surgery?" In a way, Nicholas said, sitting in the chair beside the bed. But it's about something much more important than that. Emma tilted her head. What could be more important than our hearts getting better? Nicholas looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Then he turned back to the children, his children, and smiled. It's about finding out that sometimes the most important things in life are the ones we never knew we were looking for, Nicholas said gently. And sometimes, when we think we've lost everything, we discover that what we're meant to have was right there, waiting for us all along. As he began to tell Emma and Ethan the truth about who he was and who they were to him, Nicholas felt a sense of peace settle over him for the first time in 9 years. Outside, the Seattle rain continued to fall, but inside room 247 of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, a family was finally being born. The drawing that had started it all lay on the bedside table, no longer a mysterious image from a child's dream, but a perfect representation of love finding its way home against all odds. The end. Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.